The Junkyard discovery. The sun was setting behind the hills of rusted metal and broken machines, and the long shadows stretched across the forgotten junkyard, where Elias spent most of his days scavenging for parts. He was a young man, no older than 20, with rough hands from pulling apart old engines and tired eyes from nights spent selling scraps to keep himself alive. The junkyard was all he had known since childhood, and every corner of it held secrets from wars fought long ago. Ships that once flew through the stars now lay broken and rotting under the weight of time and silence. Elias moved carefully through the maze of debris, his boots crunching on shattered glass and twisted metal, as he searched for anything valuable. That evening, something caught his eye near the back of the yard, half buried beneath a collapsed frame of what looked like an ancient shuttle. It was a dark metal object, rounded and smooth, with strange markings that had not faded even after centuries of neglect. He pushed aside the beams and wires that covered it and slowly pulled it free. At first it looked like just another helmet, maybe, from one of the old wars that people barely spoke of anymore. But as Elias turned it over in his hands, he felt an odd warmth, a faint pulse almost like a heartbeat against his skin. He frowned, brushing the dirt away, and then he realized the visor of the helmet was not cracked like most relics. Instead, it flickered faintly with a dim blue light. Curiosity pulled him deeper. He carried the helmet to his small shack at the edge of the yard and set it on his workbench. The glow grew stronger, as if responding to his presence. He leaned closer and whispered to himself, wondering who might have worn it hundreds of years ago. Without thinking much, he lifted the helmet and placed it over his head. The world around him vanished, and for a breathless moment, all he saw was darkness. Then a voice spoke, clear and sharp inside his mind. "Commander Rowe, have returned. But according to my records, you died 412 years ago." Elias froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. He yanked at the helmet, but it would not come off instead. The visor flared with images, ghostly and fragmented. He saw flashes of soldiers in armor standing in formation, vast starships locked in battle against fleets of alien craft, explosions tearing across the void of space. The voice continued, calm and steady, like a soldier reporting to a superior. "Biometric. Match confirmed. DNA signature authentic. You are Commander Ryan Solis of the Terran Defense Fleet. You fell in the Battle of Orlan Gate 4 centuries past." Elias stammered, trying to find words. His name was not Ryan Solis. He was just Elias, a junkyard scavenger, nothing more. He had never fought in any battles, never even left the surface of Earth, which most now considered a backwater world cut off from galactic affairs. He shouted at the voice, demanding answers, but the helmet seemed almost alive, its glow surrounding him with warmth and authority. The voice introduced itself as Argus, a command intelligence system designed to serve the human fleet. Argus insisted Elias was its rightful commander, and that his return meant unfinished battles, still awaited resolution. Fear and wonder tangled in his chest. He staggered back against the workbench, gasping for air. What if this was not a mistake? What if the helmet had truly belonged to a leader from humanity's lost wars? History books barely mentioned those days, claiming that humanity had been spared by the mercy of the Galactic Council after a disastrous conflict centuries ago. Yet Argus spoke as if humanity had not been spared, but had been erased, hidden, rewritten to bury the truth. Elias pulled the helmet off at last and stared at it, resting in his trembling hands. The blue glow still pulsed gently like a heartbeat, as if waiting for him to return. He felt a strange pull deep inside his chest, as though the helmet had chosen him. He knew his life would no longer be the same. The junkyard no longer seemed safe or quiet. It was a graveyard filled with secrets, and one of those secrets had just awakened. Outside, the night settled over the heaps of rust, and shadow stars appeared. Above, like silent witnesses, Elias glanced at them with a new unease. The helmet's words echoed in his mind. "Commander, you died 412 years ago." The boy who had lived his life searching for scraps now stood on the edge of something far greater. He could not explain it, but he knew the galaxy had just shifted, and that shift had begun with him in a forgotten junkyard, holding a helmet that still remembered the war. The pulse of light on its visor beat like a promise, waiting for him to answer. the voice of the past. The helmet sat on the table in front of Elias, glowing faintly in the dim light of his shack, and he stared at it as if it might leap alive again and start speaking on its own. His hand still trembled from the memory of the voice that had filled his head. He whispered to himself, telling himself it was impossible to trick a glitch in some old piece of technology. Yet deep inside he knew it was not broken. It was real. And it had called him Commander. The junkyard boy who lived by selling scraps could not make sense of it. At last curiosity won over fear. He reached for the helmet again and slid it slowly over his head. The familiar hum returned, filling his ears, and the blue light blossomed across the visor. Once more the voice of Argus spoke, steady, calm, patient. Commander, diagnostic cycle, complete neural interface. Stable, do you wish to resume command operations? Elias tried to answer, though his voice cracked as he said he was not the commander, that he was just Elias. Argus paused, then replied, your DNA and neural pattern are an exact match to Commander Rian Solis. The probability of error is less than 1 in a billion. The commander lives even if 4 centuries have passed. Elias demanded to know what had happened 400 years ago. He asked why Argus believed he had died. The voice shifted tone and began to recount fragments of memory like an ancient soldier waking from sleep. Argus spoke of the Terran Defense Fleet, standing alone against the united powers of the Galactic Council, who had judged humanity too dangerous, too unpredictable, too wild. The war was brutal. Argus said, humanity fought with courage and fury that shook the galaxy. Entire fleets were lost, but humans refused to kneel until at last the Battle of Orlan Gate came, a battle where Commander Solis fell, and where the Council declared humanity defeated. Argus said records were sealed after that day, but something was wrong. The AI's memory was incomplete, as if entire portions had been erased or hidden. Elias listened, stunned. The history he had learned as a boy told a different story. Teachers had said humanity surrendered after showing resistance, and the Council spared Earth out of mercy, allowing humans to survive as a small minor species cut off from galactic power. They told children that humans had been reckless and dangerous, and their fall was a warning about pride. But Argus insisted this was not true. Argus claimed humanity had not been spared, but buried. That someone had deliberately rewritten history to hide what really happened. The helmet's voice shifted, and Elias saw more images flickering through the visor. Starships shaped like daggers of light burning across. The darkness of space soldiers shouting war cries that echoed in languages long forgotten, banners, carrying the emblem of Earth held high as fire rained around them. The sight filled him with something he had never known before. It was pride. It was grief. It was a sense that his people had been more than scavengers and forgotten outcasts. They had been warriors who shook the galaxy. Argus continued to speak, saying the helmet contained vast tactical data, battle logs, and encrypted files that could only be unlocked by the commander's presence. Elias protested again that he was not Rian Solis, yet Argus insisted identity was more than memory. The body, the blood, the pattern of thought carried continuity. Argus believed the commander was reborn in Elias, even if the boy could not remember his past. The AI declared that if he wished, he could awaken the legacy hidden within the helmet and beyond that within Earth itself. Elias took the helmet off again, sweat dripping down his face. He felt dizzy and overwhelmed. The words of Argus echoed in his mind. The idea that humanity's history was a lie made him sick. The galaxy had looked down on Earth for centuries, treating them as nothing more than remnants of a reckless species. Yet if Argus was right, then humanity had been betrayed, not spared. They had fought to the very end, and that truth had been stolen from them. He looked at the helmet again on the table, pulsing faintly as if waiting for his decision. He knew his life had changed forever already. If he told anyone about the helmet, others would come for it. If he hid it, perhaps the secret would die with him. But as he stood there staring at the ancient relic, he felt a strange pull, stronger than fear or doubt. A voice inside him whispered that maybe Argus was not wrong. Maybe in some way he was meant to find the helmet, meant to awaken the truth, meant to carry the weight of a commander long dead. The night deepened outside and the stars glittered above Elias. Stepped outside his shack, the helmet cradled in his arms, and looked up at the sky. He wondered if beyond those stars ancient enemies still watched, if the Galactic Council still feared humanity, if Argus's words about unfinished battles were true. He shivered under the cold air, but a spark of determination lit in his chest. The junkyard scavenger was gone. A new path had opened before him, and whether he wanted it or not, it had begun with the voice of the past, whispering from a helmet that refused to be silent, whispers of a buried war. The following days dragged by with Elias unable to think about anything other than the helmet and the voice that lived inside it. He still worked in the junkyard, pulling apart old machines and stacking pieces to sell, but his hands moved without focus. His mind was full of the images Argus had shown him, fleets burning in the void, soldiers shouting war cries, and a commander who had died 4 centuries ago yet seemed to be alive again through him. Every night Elias returned to his shack and placed the helmet back on his head. And every night Argus told him more fragments of a story that felt too big, too heavy for one person to hold. Argus explained that after the Battle of Orlan Gate, humanity was declared extinct by the Galactic Council, but that extinction was not true. It was manufactured. Records had been altered, files destroyed, witnesses silenced, and those who survived were scattered and stripped. Of memory, humanity had been broken, not by defeat but by lies. The AI said it had hidden itself in the helmet as the last safeguard, waiting for its commander's DNA to awaken it once more. Elias listened, both fascinated and horrified. The history of his people had been stolen, erased so thoroughly that even their descendants believed themselves weak and unworthy of respect. Rumors began to spread among traders who visited the yard. They whispered about Elias finding something unusual because scavengers could not hide treasures for long. Someone had seen him dragging the helmet home. Someone else claimed they had glimpsed blue light in his shack, and in a place where survival depended on secrets, those whispers carried weight. Within a week, strangers arrived at the edges of the yard. They pretended to be merchants, but Elias noticed their questions always circled back to ancient relics or battle technology. Argus warned him quietly each night, saying that attention was dangerous, and that the helmet was not meant for the eyes of outsiders. Elias asked Argus why the council would go to such lengths to bury the truth. The voice answered that fear was stronger than hatred. The council feared what humanity represented, a species born from a world of storms, hunger, and endless struggle. They feared the unpredictable strength that came from desperation and the unyielding will to survive. The council did not want humanity remembered as warriors, so they remade them in memory, as reckless children who had to be spared for their own good. Elias felt anger rise in his chest at those words. His people had been made into a lesson, a warning to others, and stripped of their honor. At night, when he tried to sleep, he dreamed of voices calling him commander and of stars bending under the weight of burning fleets. He dreamed of carrying a banner he had never seen before, and of leading soldiers whose names he could not remember. He awoke drenched in sweat, but the pull inside him grew stronger. He began to feel that the helmet had not simply chosen him by chance, but by design, as though some part of him was tied to the old commander after all. The tension in the junkyard grew with every passing day. Elias noticed figures, watching him from afar, tall silhouettes near the fences that slipped away when he approached. He noticed strange lights in the sky that hovered too long before vanishing. Argus told him the signals of the helmet could be detected by advanced scanners, and warned him that the council might already be aware that their secret was unraveling. Elias felt the walls of his quiet life closing in. He wanted to throw the helmet back into the dirt to pretend none of it had happened yet. Each time he tried, he found himself unable to let go. The relic was part of him now, as natural as the blood in his veins. One evening, as he prepared to rest, Argus spoke with an urgency that Elias had never heard before. The AI said enemy ships were approaching orbit, and that someone had leaked the location of the helmet. The words chilled Elias to the bone. He stepped outside and gazed up at the stars, seeing faint red glimmers moving against the dark. Argus told him he could run, but he could not hide forever, because the helmet was no longer only a relic. It was a beacon, a spark of truth that would attract enemies and allies alike. The galaxy had forgotten humanity's war, but the memory had begun to stir, and now forces far greater than Elias were moving. The junkyard that had always felt like home suddenly felt like a cage. The silence between the heaps of twisted steel was heavy with expectation. Elias knew that the whispers of the buried war were spreading beyond Earth, and that soon nothing would ever be the same again. Hunters arrive. The silence of the junkyard was broken by the sound of engines echoing through the night. Heavy craft descended beyond the hills, their light sweeping across the broken towers of metal. Elias crouched among the heaps of debris, clutching the helmet close to his chest. Argus's voice whispered inside the visor, warning him that mercenaries had landed hired by powers that wanted the relic at any cost. Elias's heart pounded as he realized the whispers had finally drawn hunters to his doorstep. Figures in dark armor spread across the yard, moving with precision. They carried weapons unlike anything Elias had ever seen, glowing rifles that hummed with restrained power. Their eyes shone through helmets of their own, and their movements told him they were professionals, not simple raiders. Argus spoke calmly, guiding him through the shadows, telling him when to move, when to stay still, and how to avoid their sweeping lights. Elias listened, every nerve trembling but trusting the voice that had saved him once before. He made it back to his shack and shut the door behind him. But the mercenaries were already closing in. Argus told him to prepare for combat. Elias shook his head, saying he was no soldier. He had never even fired a weapon. The voice answered firmly that soldiers were not born. They were forged, and that the commander within him would know what to do. Elias wanted to argue, but before he could, the wall of his shack exploded inward under the force of a plasma blast. He stumbled back as armored figures stormed through, shouting for him to surrender the artifact. In that moment, Argus took control. The helmet lit with a surge of energy, and a projection of data filled Elias's vision. Arrows highlighted weak points in the enemy's armor, routes of escape, and scattered pieces of junk that could be used as weapons. Elias grabbed a length of rusted pipe and swung it with desperate strength, knocking aside the first attacker. He moved faster than he believed possible, his strikes guided by Argus's commands. The mercenaries fired, but Argus shouted warnings, a heartbeat before each shot, letting Elias dive and roll between piles of wreckage. They chased him deeper into the junkyard, their voices echoing over the clatter of metal. Elias's lungs burned and his arms ached, yet he felt alive in a way he never had before. For the first time, he was not scavenging for scraps, but fighting for survival, and every instinct felt sharpened by the presence of the AI. Still, he knew he could not hold out forever. Their weapons were stronger, their armor thicker, and they would not stop until the helmet was theirs. Argus urged him to reach the old shuttle frame where he had first found the relic, saying it held a dormant system hidden by the fleet centuries ago. Elias did not question, he only ran. The mercenaries closed in, their boots crashing against steel, their rifles spitting light that scorched the air. Elias dove through a gap in the wreckage and reached the collapsed shuttle. Argus commanded him to strike a panel with the pipe, and though he did not understand, he obeyed. The panel shattered, and the ground beneath them rumbled. Ancient defense turrets hidden in the junkyard powered to life, their barrels rising from the dirt with a grinding shriek. Beams of searing energy cut through the night, striking the mercenaries before they could react. Explosions shook the yard as armored bodies were thrown aside. Elias dropped to his knees, gasping as the turrets fell silent again, leaving only smoke and the smell of scorched metal. The hunters were broken, scattered, or retreating into the dark. Argus spoke again, calm but urgent, saying this was only the beginning, and that stronger forces would follow. Elias stared at the burning wreckage around him, hands trembling with shock. He had fought and survived, guided by the helmet and the voice of a war long past. He knew now that he could never return to his old life. The council, or whoever feared the truth, would never stop hunting him. As dawn broke, Elias stood among the ruins of his shack with the helmet in his arms. The junkyard that had once been his prison was now a battlefield, and he could not stay. The AI told him there were places hidden deep beneath the earth, places the council had tried to erase, where the legacy of humanity still slept. Elias felt fear, but also a strange strength awakening in him. He was no longer just a scavenger. He was a target, a bearer of the past, and perhaps something more. Argus called him commander again, And this time Elias did not deny it. He only looked at the rising sun and whispered that if enemies wanted the truth buried, he would dig until it was uncovered. Awakening. The legacy. The path out of the junkyard led Elias into the forgotten outskirts of the city where broken towers leaned against the sky like bones of giants. He carried the helmet wrapped in cloth, though. Argus's voice still whispered in his ear, guiding his steps. The battle with the mercenaries had shaken him, but it had also ignited something inside him. He no longer looked at the world as a place of rust and ruin. He looked at it as a map of hidden secrets waiting to be uncovered. Argus told him that humanity had built sanctuaries before the fall bunkers buried deep underground, where their knowledge and weapons were sealed away to be recovered, only if their kind rose again for days. Elias traveled through abandoned tunnels and collapsed highways following coordinates. Argus provided. His food supply dwindled and his body ached, but the voice kept him moving, each step carrying the weight of destiny. At last, they reached a valley, carved by time and war, its walls scarred by ancient blasts. At the valley's center stood a mound of earth overgrown with weeds and vines. It looked like nothing more than a hill. But Argus instructed Elias to clear the ground and expose a hatch. He obeyed, hacking through roots and soil until his hands struck cold metal. Beneath his fingers a symbol appeared, faint yet clear, an emblem he had never seen yet somehow recognized. It was the mark of Earth's defense fleet, a reminder of the warriors who had refused to bow. With trembling hands, Elias opened the hatch. A staircase descended into darkness. Argus activated faint lights that glowed along the walls, guiding him downward. The air smelled of dust and memory. Every step echoed as if he was trespassing on a tomb. When he reached the bottom, the chamber spread wide before him. It was a vault sealed for centuries. Racks of weapons lined the walls. Though most were broken and corroded, but deeper within stood machines, covered in dust. Shrouded by silence, they were war machines. Skeletal frames of mechs and fragments of starship cores awaiting command. Elias felt his breath catch as Argus spoke with reverence. This was one of the hidden bastions of humanity, a place the Council had sworn did not exist. Elias walked among the relics, touching them with awe. They were not scraps to be sold. They were symbols of what his people had been. The AI explained that the Council had feared these places more than any weapon because each bunker carried the memory of resistance. If the truth of them spread, the galaxy would remember the war not as humanity's shame, but as a legacy of unbroken defiance. Elias realized he was standing on proof that his people had not been erased, only hidden. Their spirit slept beneath the ground, waiting for someone to awaken it. Argus urged him to restore power to the vault. Elias followed instructions, connecting old circuits and pulling levers that had not been touched in 4 centuries. Slowly, the chamber rumbled as generators deep underground roared to life. Lights blazed across the ceiling, dust falling like rain as the vault awoke. Panels lit with ancient data screens streaming with tactical maps and encrypted messages. Elias's heart pounded as Argus announced that the system was online and awaiting the commander's command. Elias hesitated, whispering that he was no commander, only a scavenger, but Argus replied firmly that leadership was not chosen by desire but by need, and that in this moment Elias was all that remained. The vault held more than weapons. It carried records, hidden transmissions, and fragments of a story the Council had buried. Elias read reports that spoke of betrayal, allies who had turned against humanity in exchange for power armies that had been abandoned on distant worlds, commanders who fought to the last breath knowing they had been betrayed, not defeated. Elias's chest tightened as he realized his people had not fallen by weakness but by treachery. The lies he had been taught all his life shattered before the truth carved in the walls of this hidden place. As Elias explored further, he found a chamber at the heart of the vault. Inside stood a pedestal, and on it rested pieces of armor. Ancient yet intact, Argus said it belonged to Commander Solus, the man the AI believed lived again in Elias. Elias touched the armor and felt a shock run through him. The plates adjusted to his frame as though they had been waiting. The helmet he carried connected instantly with the suit, glowing brighter than ever. Argus's voice filled the chamber with pride, declaring that the commander had returned. Elias looked at himself, reflected in a broken mirror. A scavenger no longer stood there, but something more. The armor was heavy, yet it felt like part of him. He felt strength not only in his body but in his spirit. He knew enemies would come again, stronger than before because the Council would sense this awakening already. He also knew he could not turn back. The vault was alive, the machines were stirring, and the legacy of his people had begun to rise. Elias tightened his fists and whispered that if the galaxy wanted to bury the truth, then he would make sure it was carved into the stars themselves. The awakening of the fleet. Elias stood in the heart of the vault, feeling the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. The armor clung to him as if it remembered battles he had never fought, but victories he had already earned. In some other life, Argus guided him to a control console, a massive interface buried beneath layers of dust and rust. The screen flickered as Elias touched it, revealing star charts of planets and systems long abandoned by humanity. Coordinates blinked, urgently showing installations and starbases hidden in deep space that the Council had erased from memory. He realized that the galaxy was not empty. It was a map of potential power waiting for the one who dared to claim it. Argus instructed Elias to initiate the awakening protocol. This would call the surviving war machines and long-dormant starships to life. Each command required precise timing and courage. Elias hesitated because he had never commanded armies before. Yet he felt the voice of the commander inside him, the echo of the man who had died 412 years ago, guiding his hand. The first signal pulsed through the void like a heartbeat. The lights in the vault shivered as if the machines themselves were drawing breath outside the vault. The city remained silent, unaware of what stirred below the junkyard. The broken highways and the skeletal towers became a stage for something much larger than any single human mind could comprehend. Elias sent the command, and distant outposts activated one by one. Doors that had never opened in centuries creaked, revealing rows of dormant mechs. Their metal limbs were stiff but powerful. Their sensors flickered to life, scanning the empty sky for threats. Starships lying buried under mountain ranges and hidden in asteroid fields slowly powered up their engines, sending tremors through space signals cascading across the galaxy that humanity was returning. Argus projected tactical simulations, showing fleets forming like stars in a constellation. Elias watched in awe as the dormant installations came alive. Automated defenses armed themselves, and communication nodes broadcasted encrypted signals, only accessible to humanity's AI networks. He realized this was more than a fleet. It was a resurrection. The Council had believed that hiding humans' power would erase them, but in truth it only forced their strength to sleep, waiting for the right moment. As the hours passed, Elias trained with the machines, learning to move in tandem with their systems. Each mech responded to his thoughts, the armor linking directly to his nervous system, enhancing speed and strength. His body burned with exertion, yet his mind felt sharper than ever. He realized that the commander he had become was not just a warrior, but a strategist, a leader capable of seeing the moves of enemies before they could act. Argus reminded him that time was critical. The Council had spies everywhere, and once they realized the awakening had begun, they would come to crush it before it could fully form. Elias decided to test the fleet. He sent the first squad of mechs to reclaim a small outpost that had been abandoned for centuries. It was a barren world covered in ash and craters, but the sensors showed signs of Council patrols nearby. The mechs moved silently, coordinated, with the precision of centuries of warfare. Elias felt each movement as if the machines were extensions of his body. They cleared the outpost without a shot fired, eliminating automated traps and restoring communications for future operations. The success was intoxicating, yet also sobering, because he knew that the Council would retaliate with force far greater than he had seen. As night fell above the vault, Elias looked through the reinforced windows, seeing the stars stretching endlessly. His thoughts drifted to Earth, the home his people had lost, and the humans who had survived in hiding. He felt their collective pain and resolve flowing into him, their memories and sacrifices giving him purpose. The fleet below was not just a weapon, it was the embodiment of a species refusing to be forgotten. He whispered to Argus that humanity would no longer be silent, and the AI responded with a rare warmth, declaring that the galaxy would remember the name of the commander who awakened the fleet. Suddenly, a warning signal blared across the chamber. Red lights illuminated the wall, showing council ships approaching through the system sensors, screaming with detection alarms. Elias's heart raced, yet he felt calm because the fleet was ready. Mechs armed themselves, engines ignited, and starships powered up weapons systems glinting in artificial light. The voice of the commander echoed through him, commanding formations and strategies he had never imagined executing. Each movement, precise and unstoppable as the machines responded like extensions of his will. He realized that the war that had started centuries ago was about to ignite again, and this time humanity would not retreat. Elias raised his hand, signaling the fleet. Forward, the council would soon witness that the humans they thought were dead were not only alive but stronger than ever. Their technology, their legacy, and their fury all combined into a force that could not be ignored. The awakening had begun, and the galaxy would tremble at the sight of humanity rising from the ashes of history. Humanity strikes back. The fleet surged forward through the void as if the stars themselves had parted to make way for it. Elias felt the pulse of every engine, the hum of every weapon, and the life of every mech flowing into him. The council's ships appeared on the horizon like a wall of darkness ready to crush the humans they had long believed extinct. Yet Elias felt no fear, only a burning determination, because he knew that humanity had survived worse and had risen stronger than anyone could imagine. Argus projected tactical overlays showing the formations of the council fleet, every weakness highlighted, every vulnerable point mapped out for the humans to exploit. Elias raised his hand, and the first salvo launched from the human ship's lasers, cutting through the void. With precision unmatched by centuries of council arrogance, the enemy scrambled to respond, but the humans moved with a fluidity and coordination that was almost alive. Every mech and starship followed Elias's commands instinctively, the long-lost skills of the commander merging with his own mind. He watched as council fighters were torn apart by synchronized strikes, defensive shields crumbling under the onslaught, and communications disrupted, leaving the enemy blind to the humans' true strength. On the surface of a nearby planet, a squad of human mechs landed with grace and fury. Their steps shook the ground as they advanced through ruined cities, taking control of installations the council had left, thinking they were abandoned. Every human who had survived in hiding joined the fight, their hearts fueled by centuries of oppression, their hands now holding the weapons of their ancestors. The planet erupted in a storm of fire and motion, yet Elias remained calm because he had seen this battle before in simulations, and he knew that the humans could turn every disadvantage into a victory. The council's flagship appeared larger than any ship Elias had ever seen, its hull gleaming with arrogance and power. Their leaders watched from behind reinforced glass, believing that humanity was weak and scattered, yet the humans had something they could never understand: the spirit of survival, the cunning of generations that had adapted to every challenge, and the fury of a species that had been underestimated for too long. Elias gave the order, and the fleet split, executing maneuvers that no council officer could predict. Starships weaved through asteroid belts using gravity wells to amplify their attacks, while mechs on the surface seized strategic points, neutralizing enemy defenses before they could react. Argus spoke in a calm yet urgent tone, reminding Elias that the council had reserves hidden throughout the galaxy, and that the fight would be long. But humanity now held the initiative. Elias felt the weight of centuries on his shoulders, but also the pride of leading a species that refused to bow. He ordered the deployment of long-dormant dreadnoughts, their massive weapons turning the void into a storm of destruction. The council's fleet was forced to retreat in confusion and fear, because they had never seen humans fight like this, and they could not comprehend how a single man in armor commanded an entire species to victory. As the dust of battle settled, Elias walked among the mechs on the planet's surface, feeling the energy of life returning to humanity's forgotten worlds. Every installation reclaimed, every starship activated, every human alive reminded him that this was only the beginning. The council would strike again, but now they faced not scattered colonies but an organized force, a species awakened and united for the first time in centuries. Elias turned to Argus and whispered that the commander's legacy had survived through him, that humanity would no longer hide in shadows, and that the galaxy would learn that humans were not to be underestimated. The AI responded with a soft affirmation, and the fleet began sending signals to all hidden human colonies, calling them to join the fight to reclaim their birthright and to take vengeance on those who had tried to erase them from history. The stars shone brighter that night, as if acknowledging humanity's return. The humans looked up, knowing that the darkness they had endured for centuries had not broken them, but had forged them into warriors capable of facing any threat. The Council would remember this day, and every species in the galaxy would hear the story of the humans who died 412 years ago, only to rise again, stronger, faster, and deadlier than ever before. Elias lifted the helmet to his face and felt the voice of the commander merge with his own. Knowing that the war had begun, the humans had awakened, and the galaxy would tremble at their name. He raised his hand, signaling the fleet forward, and the first coordinated strike against the Council flagship blazed through the void. Humanity was no longer hiding. Humanity had returned, and the stars would never forget the fury of a species that refused to die. The galaxy fell silent for a moment, as if holding its breath, while humanity stood tall among the stars. Elias looked across the fleet, feeling the weight of every lost century and the strength of every human who had survived the darkness. Every ship gleamed with power, every mech moved with precision, and every soldier carried the fire of a species that refused to be forgotten. The Council had underestimated them for centuries, believing humans weak, scattered, and long extinct, but now the truth burned brighter than the core of any star. The humans were awake, and they were unstoppable. On the surface of planets that had been abandoned for generations, humans emerged from, hiding their eyes wide with wonder and fear tempered by hope. They saw the ships arriving, the mechs marching, the power of their ancestors restored in forms they had only dreamed of. Humanity's engineers, scientists, and warriors worked together, seamlessly turning ruins into fortresses, technology into weapons, and courage into strategy. Every colony sent signals of allegiance. Every hidden city joined the awakening, and the galaxy began to tremble at the name of humanity. Elias stood on the command deck, feeling the pulse of every life around him. The helmet that had spoken to him centuries ago now felt like a part of him, guiding him, whispering tactics and history and courage. He knew the Council would retaliate. They would strike with fury. But humans had learned patience, resilience, and cunning beyond measure. Every maneuver executed, every starship deployed, every mech advanced was a lesson in survival, and a warning to anyone who had thought they could destroy humanity. The first wave of the counterattack swept across Council territories with surgical precision, taking control of strategic stations, disabling fleets before they could even respond. The humans moved like shadows in the void, striking quickly and disappearing, leaving chaos in their wake. Every victory inspired more to rise, every signal sent to hidden humans brought fresh warriors into the fight, and the galaxy began to shift under the weight of a species that refused to kneel. The Council watched helplessly, as their centuries of planning crumbled under the unstoppable force of human will. Elias felt the unity of humanity in his mind, the connection of minds, hearts, and courage spanning light years. They were no longer scattered remnants. They were a collective force, a storm that would sweep across every world that had doubted them. Every human alive felt it. The surge of strength, the certainty of purpose, the knowledge that they were reclaiming their place in the cosmos and no enemy could stand against them. Humanity's voice rose not in anger, but in the quiet thunder of inevitability, signaling to all that they had returned, and they were the apex predators of the stars. The final assault began with the Council's flagship surrounded by humans. On all sides, weapons blazing, defenses collapsing, and panic spreading through ranks that had never faced such unity. Elias gave the command, and the last salvo struck the core. The ship shuddered, cracked, and exploded, illuminating the darkness with fire and light. Humanity had won the first battle, and the galaxy had learned its lesson that humans were not to be underestimated and would never again be dismissed as extinct. As the light faded, Elias removed the helmet and looked at the stars, feeling the legacy of the commander flow through him. He knew that the fight would continue. The challenges would rise. But now humanity stood as one, strong, united, and immortal in spirit. The galaxy had witnessed the return of a species that had survived impossible odds and turned them into power, and now every being who had doubted humans would tremble. Knowing that the past 412 years had forged the deadliest and most determined warriors the universe had ever seen, the humans cheered. The fleet moved forward, colonies rejoiced, and Elias smiled, knowing that the galaxy had finally learned that to challenge humanity was to challenge the very essence of survival and strength and cunning, and that from now on, humans would no longer be the hunted but the hunters, the masters of their destiny, and the unshakable force in the void, the end